name is Ellie Snyder. I am interviewing Brenda Vance on March 28, 2015 on the Ball State campus for the Ball State Oral History African American Alumni Project. Welcome.
Thank you.
Could you tell me where and when you were born?
I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, Coleman Hospital, August 26, 1952, 1:45 p.m., and I was the only African American baby in the hospital at that time.
Wow. Could you tell me a little bit about your parents and what they did?
My mother worked for RCA for 36 years. She started in the press floor, worked her way up to upper management to the point that when she retired, the president of RCA called her and flew. He was supposed to be her surprise guest because she had trained him, but his two senior vice presidents came in. Her claim to fame is that she pressed Elvis Presley's first record. My father worked for the railroad, and he was from the South. Different perspective. I often tell people I grew up in a mixed marriage because mother was, she'll be 92 in a couple weeks, and she's a Republican, lifelong Republican, and my father was a Democrat. Mother's right-handed, dad was left-handed. Mother was Baptist, and we stayed in church all day. My father was Methodist, 1 hour, you're good, you're gone, you got God, let's go. So I often tell people I grew up in a mixed marriage.
Would you say that was middle class?
I grew up by Butler University. Mm-hmm. So yes, they were the third family in the community that we grew up in, third African American family that we grew up in. Mother, when she was, my father bought the house right after World War II. He's a World War II veteran. And the house only cost $8,000. Back then, African Americans couldn't get mortgages. So he put $4,000 down, 50% down, and they had a note of $43 a month. And my grandfather thought they were going to starve to death, so every Sunday he gave them a chicken. Mother tells a story about when they moved in, she was pregnant with my sister, and that the Butler 27 bus wouldn't stop to pick her up. It was a white lady who lived on the corner, and when she would see my mother out there, she would come stand next to my mother, so the bus driver would stop, and then she'd go back in.
Could you tell me your parents' names for me?
Yes, my mother's name is Edith Vance Jones, and my father's name was E.S. Vance.
So you mentioned that your family was part of the church?
Mm-hmm.
What exactly was your family's involvement?
My family's involvement in the church, if you go right now, St. John Missionary Baptist Church, my great-grandmother, whose name was Americus Davis, started the church. If you go to Indianapolis in the World War Memorial Library, I think it's Meridian, excuse me, my grandfather organized the troops from Kentucky and Indiana for the Spanish-American War, and his picture is there. It was an honor for me to see them when I went to Cuba, to see where the troops landed and to see the American troops, and I was telling everybody about his writings. It was real cool.
So it sounds like your family has a very rich history that you have been taught throughout your life.
I would say so. My grandfather's brother, I don't know how much you know about African American history, but Marcus Garvey, he was with Marcus Garvey when they went over to Liberia. And when he got sick, he wanted to get back into the country. And my grandfather, so stories told, had to take a train to New York with the family Bible to show that he did belong in America, because he had been gone so long. They were like, you don't belong here. So, yeah, we were rich in African American history.
Did your love of history reflect in your schoolwork?
I think my zeal for learning. I don't know if my parents purposely did it or it was just a house my dad liked when he got out of World War II that he bought close to Butler University. But there was never a time in my life that I knew that I wasn't going to school. We used to walk up to Butler's campus and go, that's me when I get big, but that's me when I get big, that's my boyfriend. You know, we just did it. So we always knew that we were going to go to college. Plus, back then, Butler was community friendly because a lot of the professors were our neighbors. So I took music lessons at Butler University campus. I took tap dancing lessons on their campus. So we were there. And back then, you could go to concerts for $2. So when I came to Ball State and took music appreciation, I said, this is old hat. I grew up with this. So I took all the easy courses at Ball State, like music appreciation, art appreciation. This is what I grew up with. So that was an easy A as far as I was concerned.
You said that you spent a lot of time on Butler's campus.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see many African Americans spending time or involved their students there as well?
No. No.
How'd that make you feel?
Back then, I don't think, children don't really see themselves different from anyone until they're told that they're different. And we were never told that we were different than those kids on campus.
Do you remember the first time you noticed that there might have been a racial difference?
We were told there was a park named Riverside. We couldn't go to Riverside, and when we would go over and visit my father's sister, we had to pass Riverside. They go, why can't we go to that park? But it had a clear sign, whites only. And my parents would say, you can't go there because you're not white. Plus, in passing Riverside, there's also a golf course that's still there today at 38th and 421 Michigan Road. And I can't go there today. And because of African American. And when you look on their website, they show you all these pictures from 1940s, 1930s, 1950s. There's not one African American in their website today.
Would you say that's just because they purposefully don't welcome African Americans in there?
Yes.
So it's kind of a...
It's a country club who's clear.
Yeah.
Their statement is clear.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about your middle school.
We didn't have middle school back then.
Mm-hmm.
We had kindergarten through 8th grade. It was James Whitcomb Raleigh School 43. If you go in my mother's china cabinet, she has a plaque that she was participating in the PTA from 1952 to 1977, 25 years of service. She'd been PTA president and all those things. But to give you a good, reflection of what my parents lived through, when my oldest sister entered kindergarten in 1952, she and Loretta Oden, they were the only two African Americans, or colored back then, in their kindergarten class. When she graduated from School 43 in 1961, there was only one white. The neighborhood changed that much in that length of time. And my mother can tell you stories about people knocking on their door saying the blacks are moving. They thought she was the maid. So, and she said, really? They're moving in here? So she has lots of stories about that.
How would you say the comparison was in your school?
Comparison to what?
To the average number of Caucasians to the average number of African Americans.
By the time I came along, and I'm 5 or 6 years younger than my sister, it was predominantly African American. The good thing about the elementary school was that most of our teachers were also our neighbors, just like a lot of the people who worked at Butler were our neighbors. And so they had an investment in the elementary school because their children went there. Their children were in scouts with us. Their children played Little League with my brothers. So we had a wholesome community.
So would you say that the community kind of acted as extended family for you?
For sure.
Did you have any actual extended family that you were close to in the area?
When we were growing up, everyone was your aunt or your uncle. And so I thought I had a large family. Even though they were just your neighbor. I thought I had several grandparents. I said, life is really good. You have all these grandparents, the ice cream truck come by, Mom, can I have an ice cream truck? Something for Mr. Softy? No. No problem. Go down 2 doors there. Mrs. Hubble, how are you doing today? Fine. And Brenda, would you like something from Mr. Softy? Why, sure. Have you had dinner? Why, sure I've had dinner. So I thought, this is great. I mean, life doesn't get any better than this.
Do you know many of those people still today?
Most of them have gone on, right? But Mrs. Rush is still there. She moved in the neighborhood in 1959. She's still there.
Could you tell me a little bit about your high school experiences?
High school was good. And this is probably one of the pivotal points in life, where in high school, African Americans and blacks, we saw ourselves as one. It was right after, it was during the 60s, we were in high school when Martin Luther King got killed. And we were all mourning and grieving that. And we thought that racism would be gone by the time we became adults. We were just that close. We're planning our 45th anniversary, high school anniversary now, reunion. And people are still working together, the blacks and whites who went to school together, which I think is pretty cool for a cohesive unit to last that long. But then you get into the real world and you find what existed in Shortridge is not the real world.
So you went to Shortridge High School?
Mm-hmm.
I read that there was an incident in 1969 at Shortridge. Were you there during that?
Sure was.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
My cousin Fred Powell was president of the senior class then. The students walked out, as I recalled, in protest. And it was more escalated from the news media. I remember my mother calling home and saying, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." And she was listening to the news. And she called my uncle, her brother, and said, "Well, what does Fred say about that?" Because he was president of senior class. He said, "Fred's fine too." But it was the 60s. Was there racism at Shortridge? Absolutely. But it was from the teachers. The principal at that time, Mr. Schultz, Mr. Green. I can remember Lucy Gay Howard put me out of her honors history class because I wanted to write about civil rights. And she told me that wasn't history. And I told her, well, that's my story, and history is HIS. That's his story, but this is my story. So this is my history. And I remember my parents came to school, and my father had just worked a double shift. And we were sitting there in the conference, and he asked Mrs. Howard, "Is Brenda respectful?" She said, "Yes, Brenda's very respectful." "Does Brenda do her homework?" He said, "Yes, Brenda does her homework." And he said, "So what's the problem?" And she said, "She doesn't write what I want her to write." And my father was like, "This is America. The child can write about what she wants to write about." And she said, "Oh, no, she can't." And so it took me kind of out of the equation. And you're talking to a man from the South who grew up in racism, who went to a one-rule school, who had to work sharecropping and all this stuff, and then you're going to say that his child can't talk about what she wants to talk about? It didn't go well, but I was so proud of my father. I was real proud of him. So they moved me to another class.
So you said a lot of the racism at the time came from the teachers?
You still had old school teachers. And I remember my mother going to Mrs. Daniels, Sarah Daniels, who was a neighbor, and asking her, and she made me go away so she couldn't hear I wasn't supposed to hear the conversation. And Mother said, "That woman's not going to change, and neither is Brenda. So move her." But she said, "Mrs. Howard is from the old school of thought." So Shortridge was built as a feeder school to Butler. I don't know if you know that. And so they had certain things they wanted done in a certain way, and things were changing.
Did things change after you were moved to a different class?
Yeah. I mean, I got an easy A. I was in honors history. So they moved me to a regular history class. It's just an easy A. I mean, as far as the climate of the school, after the incident in Shortridge, Mr. Schultz was removed as principal because he was from the old school. They had Mr. Green as principal. Mr. Green made a gallant effort to change. He tried, but...
What kind of changes could you see after his arrival?
I gave him credit. Mr. Schultz, we only saw him at assembly. Mr. Green actually stood at the school doors and greeted you.
And he greeted everyone the same?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That must have felt like a real rise for you, if that makes sense.
Well, at least you could touch someone. And when you're trying to correct someone, first you have to connect with them. At least he was trying to connect with the students, whereas Mr. Schultz did not.
And did you always think that you'd be going to college?
I always knew I was going to college. Mm-hmm. All of us went to college. There were 6 children, 6 people going to college. My parents had 4 kids in college at the same time.
Wow, was that hard for them to manage?
I thought so, because I was still at home. And I thought, I mean, I would ask for stuff. My father goes, you had four brothers and sisters in college. And I thought, okay, when I get big, you don't have 4 kids in college at the same time.
Like, that's me time.
Right.
So would you say that it was really your parents' motivation that led you to college, or was it that connection to Butler that you had?
I think it was our parents' motivation. It was the community. Environment plays a lot. If everyone around you has a college education, then, you know, people with 3-piece suits want to live around people with 3-piece suits. And so if everyone around you has a college education, you want that too.
So you would say a lot of people in your town?
In our little community, yeah.
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 How did you choose Ball State?
How did I choose Ball State? Well, make a long story short, after I finished Shortridge, I was a United Negro College Fund scholar, and I went to Clark College in Atlanta, Georgia, stayed there a year. And I probably should have stayed there for the rest of the time. It was a very nurturing environment, very helpful environment, small school, did very well there. But I was in love with my little high school boyfriend. And he had gone to Vincennes, and he said, well, let's transfer together. So we transferred to Ball State. Big mistake. Anyway, as far as love life's concerned. Anyway, make a long story short, I transferred to Ball State.
What immediate differences could you see between Clark College and Ball State?
It was like night and day. Clark College was very nurturing. They taught you that you're African American, and when you leave here, people are going to see you as African American, so your ice has to be colder. You have to jump higher, you have to run faster, and they nurtured you to do well, extremely well. And you had study time. The dormitory mothers, they were like your extended mothers. Have you studied? Let me see your homework. When you went out the door, that doesn't match. Go back and let's try it again. That type of thing. Ball State was more larger classrooms. At Clark, your professors were primarily African American. There was somebody who looked like you, who had PhDs, and you knew that, oh, if they got a PhD, I can get a PhD. Ball State, that wasn't the case. There were people who were Eurocentric in appearance, Eurocentric in thought, and if you didn't have the self-discipline to do it on your own, shame on you.
Do you think any of the differences had to do with the geographic location of the colleges, or do you think it was just an individual mentality of the colleges?
Historically, black colleges and universities were primarily started by church groups, and they were started to nurture African Americans. And still today, they produce more than 50% of African American students who graduate from college come from them. And their whole focus is to make sure that you're ready for this real world. And they do a good job.
So you would say the biggest difference is that Clark College to you was that African American experience where they were there to teach you you could become something.
Right, and my mother, getting back to why I went to Clark College, my mother thought we were too white. And so she made all of her children, with the exception of my little sister, go to a historically black college for 1 year. She didn't care if you graduated from there or not, but you were going to go 1 year there. My older brother and my oldest sister went to Tennessee State. My other brother and sister went to Bishop. Then my sister transferred and she finished at Baylor University. But everyone did at least 1 or 2 years at a black school.
Would you say that did change them culturally from the too white?
Oh yeah, because you're in the South.
Yeah.
and your father has told you about all these colored only and white only faucets, but you're standing there looking at them like, you know, Daddy told the truth. They do have colored only and white only faucets. And you go to Richard's department store, and even though this was 1970, it's at the tail end of the civil rights, people still sit on one side of the counter, and other people still sit on the other side of the counter, and things really, the mentality still has not changed that much.
Could you tell me the names of your siblings?
My oldest sister's name was Beverly. If she were living, she died about 20 years ago. And then my second oldest sister's name is Sandra, and then there's Edward. And then there's Paul, who died about 3 years ago. And then there's me. And then I have a little sister named Denise.
That is a large family.
There's 6 of us.
Mm-hmm. How did it feel being the 5th child?
It was good because they used to always get in trouble. My parents would tell them, don't let anybody in the house while we're gone, and they would give a party. So I said, that's not smart. If they tell you not to have anyone in the house, why would you have a party and everyone dancing on the porch and in the backyard and around? Not smart.
So you said when you came to Ball State that you didn't have as many African-American professors.
I only had one.
Yeah.
And that was Dr. James Scott, which I'll be eternally grateful to.
How was Dr. James Scott a mentor or an inspirational figure to you?
Well, at that time, he first was professor, then he got promoted to dean of the School of Social Science or Social Services. And he had gone to Clark College, his undergrad, then he went to IU for his PhD. And he asked me one day, Brenda, what are you going to do when you finish college? And I said, well, I'll work a year, then I'll get married. He said, why do you do that? That's what my older brothers and sisters did. They graduated from college, they worked a couple of years, then they got married. So I thought that's what you're supposed to do. He said, have you thought about grad school? No. And he said, you can go to grad school. I can. And then he said, let me show you where you can find the top 5 graduate programs. And so he did. So I did the research, I applied to him, he wrote me a letter of recommendations as other professors, and I got accepted all 5.
So what was your major?
My major was social work and urban and regional planning. I thought I was going to plan cities and save the world.
How did you come to choose that major?
Well, again, we're products of the 60s, and my church in Indianapolis, what little civil rights movement they had in Indianapolis occurred at our church. Martin Luther King spoke at our church. Ralph Abernathy spoke at our church. As a child, I got to see all the civil rights leaders as our church. Our church was very pivotal about social and institutional change in Indianapolis. So I thought, if I become a social worker and plan the cities, I'm good.
Did you ever consider changing your major, or were you just straight with that one until you got out?
I wanted to be a drama major, but my father told me he wasn't going to support a poor actress. I was really good in high school as a thespian. I was good.
Yeah?
Right.
Could you tell me a little bit about your experiences in high school?
I was Helen Keller in The Dreammaker, and that's a funny story because my father took off work to see me, and then afterwards he said, I took off work, and they led you around the stage, and all you said at the end was, wah, wah. And so every play after that, he would say, are you going to say anything? But yeah, that's the one that and Dobie Gillis Goes to Somewhere. That was one I had a leading role in. It was fun.
Did you get to continue with drama at Ball State and any clubs or anything?
No, I kind of gave up. After my father said he wasn't going to support a starving actress, I kind of put that on the back burner.
What organizations were you involved with?
Very little, just Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
How did you decide to join a sorority?
Everyone that I admired as a child was an AK. And so when I said, when I get big, I'm going to be an AK, I'm going to drive a convertible with a stick shift, and I'm going to have lots of boyfriends.
So it was just kind of a dream for you growing up, and then you got here and you're like, well.
Yeah, when I finished school, I went and got, it wasn't a convertible, I got a sports car, the whole 9 yards. I'm an AK with a sports car. In fact, for my 21st birthday, my parents gave me an option of either spending the summer in Europe with them or getting a new car for my 21st birthday. Well, that was a no-brainer. I took the new car. I got a Mustang.
And that's a, is that an African-American sorority, I take it?
We're the oldest African-American sorority in the world.
So you kind of, with the history theme again?
Mm-hmm.
And was there ever any, like, friction between you and other sororities or fraternities on campus?
Back then, I would say that we weren't quite together as far as our, the AKAs and the Deltas, and there weren't any other. The Sigma Gamma Rhos, they weren't on campus. There was friction, I'm not going to say friction, but we weren't as sisterly as we could have been.
What did your sorority do in, say, their free time?
In our free time, we did a lot of community service in the community.
For you, did that tie into your major at all?
Pardon me?
Did that tie into your major at all?
I don't know if it tied into my major as much as upbringing. We were always doing community service as a child through the church, through the community. You're always feeding somebody, always clothing somebody, always helping somebody.
Do you remember any service you did that seemed particularly rewarding for you?
There was a family, we adopted a family for the 3 years I was here. And at that time, the little girls were like, do you have a husband? No, we're in college. College? And so I guess we were role models for these little girls, that you can do something. Women can have something other than husbands. You know, you can go to college, you can have a career. So we would go get them every Saturday and just do fun stuff with them and do their homework with them and teach them the latest dances and all that stuff. So to see the evolution of their thought process, I go to high school, and after high school I go to college. Yeah, that was cool.
And the Vietnam War was kind of going on while you were in college. Mm-hmm. Did that have an effect on you personally or anyone you were close to?
Yeah, I remember probably a month after my oldest brother finished college, after he got his degree, they sent that letter, your friends, neighbors, request your presence in Uncle Sam. And my father, being a World War II veteran, plus my second brother was already in the Navy, just thought it was only natural that he go, and he said, no, I'm not going. And that was a hot point in the family. And that was the first time in my life I ever agreed with my older brother. I said, no, he shouldn't go. And my father when he got all his medals and gave a history of people your grandfather organized the troops from Indiana, Kentucky in the Spanish-American War. I mean, you are a warrior. And my brother said, not me. You may be one, but not me. And he didn't go.
So when you say he got a letter, was he drafted?
Yeah.
How did he handle not going?
Excuse me, I'm not too sure I can legally tell you what he did to get out of the draft.
Was anybody else you knew drafted or chose to go?
My second oldest brother was there. He was in the Navy, but he never got in the thick of the war. I think one thing that's influenced my oldest brother was a guy named Chick Sanders that he had grown up with. Chick got a scholarship from Tech High School to college, and they drafted him out of college, which was interesting. And he went to Vietnam, and he was dead in 30 days. And so the whole family was devastated because the families were close. And I think that had a bigger impact on Edward than anything.
Would you say that kind of impacted your family or community sphere as a whole? Oh,
we know several people who didn't come back. Stephen Sample went. He was a year older than me. Brilliant young man, graduate of Shortridge. He went to service so that he could go to college afterwards. He thought, because back then, if you did your 4 years, you could go to school in the GI Bill. He wasn't over there 3 months and got killed. So when you start looking back at the number of people who went away and came home in body bags, yeah, that affects you.
Did that affect the demeanor on campus as a whole?
On Ball State's campus?
Yeah.
Ball State's campus, I don't recall them being a socially active campus as far as demonstrations and things like that. They may have. I just don't remember it.
Do you remember any civil rights related demonstrations?
I don't remember Ball State having any social conscience whatsoever.
They've before been described as kind of an island community. Would you agree with that statement?
Ball State being an island community. They could probably fit on Gilligan's Island as far as their mentality, sure.
Could you elaborate on that for me?
I didn't see social activism, and again, I'm coming from a church that was very proactive, very socially active, to a campus that's just like, we're here, and we're going to get a degree, and that's all it is. And even the sororities and the fraternities who are African American, I don't recall us making a stand. Maybe Prentice or somebody else would tell me, but I don't recall us making any social stands on social institutional change.
Where did you live while you were at Ball State?
I lived in Studebaker. I'm not too sure if Studebaker still exists.
Let's see. And what was life like in Studebaker?
Well, they put me out. So I can only I had a white roommate, and she lasted about 1/4. And then the dorm mother's name was Betty Ribo. I'll never forget this. And she would come in your room in the middle of the night. And so we started putting chairs up at the door so that she couldn't come in. Because we thought, she woke my roommate up one time, and she said, that woman came in. Well, I thought my roommate was crazy. So I said, nobody came in. And then maybe a week or so later, I felt someone's hand on my shoulder. And I'm like, and you wake up, it's this white figure, this lady in a white robe. It was her. And I'm like, what do you want? And my roommate stood up and said, we're tired of you coming in here. You should just get out. I'm calling my mother. And she said, I just wanted to make sure you were sleeping okay. I called my mother and said, there's something wrong here. There's something wrong. You need to come to campus. But mother came and talked to him, and she just, I don't know, she gave my parents a bit, she gave them a snow act. Anyway, our sorority colors, I was pledging, were pink and green, and we were making candles. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, so we had to discard the extra wax. So we just threw it down the drain. So the next morning, the plumbing didn't work. And when the plumber came, he found pink and green wax, so she assumed that I did it. And so I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And naturally, I denied it. And so she kept talking to me, so I kept ignoring her. So then they sent the campus police after me to come pick me up. And so I went to the dean of students, and on my way there, I saw Geraldine Chavis, whose father had been elected to a judge. I said, Jerry, we're in trouble. They found the pink and green wax in the dormitory drain, and they're blaming me. She said, Vance, don't tell anything. I'll call my dad. Don't call my dad. So I'm sitting outside the dean's office. It seemed like eternity. Then I see Jerry go through. So I get up and go, Jerry, did you call your father? Oh, yeah, I got to call my father. I said, Jerry, I'm going to get put out of school for some wax. So I stayed there a little bit longer, and then the dean's secretary comes out and says, you can go. So I said, fine. Little did I, then about a week later, my parents get a letter saying I've been put out of the dorm after the end of that quarter, and that I can no longer stay in housing, student housing. And my mother's like, what happened? So I tell her, and she goes, you and that Chavis kid? Yeah, because Jerry and I got put out of Brownies too. So everything that Jerry and I were in, we got put out of. So that was my student housing experience.
You said your first roommate only lasted 1/4?
Mm-hmm.
What was your roommate like after that?
I didn't have one. Back then, I probably shouldn't admit this. We should be embarrassed to even admit this. If we had a white roommate in our, back then, all the African Americans on the floor, whatever your friends, we would come and just bombard the room and make them feel uncomfortable. Then they would move out. So then we'd have a room by ourselves. We should be embarrassed to admit that, but that's what we did.
In what ways did you make them feel uncomfortable?
Well, most of the whites here are from rural areas, so they haven't been around blacks at all. It's not that, I mean, we could have a study group, and you had 5 or 6 African Americans in the room. They just felt uncomfortable. I mean, we didn't do anything to them. It was just our mere presence made them feel uncomfortable.
It's not so embarrassing. Where did you live after you left Studebaker?
We lived out in Greenbrier, which was a hoot because the Kappas lived, Ron Boo and all them lived across the hall. And then there were some Deltas who lived underneath, and so it was like a great party.
So would you have described Ball State as a party environment during your time here?
Not for me. When you interview my husband, he'll tell you that he was a party environment. Once I learned that, number one, when I transferred here, my father made it clear I wasn't transferring again. Number two, when Dr. Scott told me I could go to graduate school, he said, but you got to get like a 3.9 or you got to have some really good grades. My focus was, I can't go anywhere else, and I got to get good grades. So that was my focus.
And so you mentioned the work your sorority did and moving out of Studebaker into the community a little bit more. How would you define the town and gown relations while you were here?
Well, one good thing that I thought the African Americans did, when we were out in Greenbrier, they opened a restaurant called Sambo's, which has all sorts of derogatory meaning. It's now called Denny's. But when they opened it, I don't know who organized, I don't know if it was Albert Hazelwood or who, but there were some Kappas who organized all of us to go in there and eat one night. And this was the first week. So restaurant, 99% students, African American. And we all ordered. And then table by table, we got up and left. We didn't pay for anything. They didn't make any money that night.
And why is it you would say that your sorority chose to do that?
It wasn't a sorority. It wasn't a sorority. It was a group of, it was the fraternities, members of the sororities and fraternities. I'm not going to say we were organized by our Pan-Hellenic affiliations, but we all just happened to belong to them. And we all just happened to go to Denny's that first week they were open. I mean, Sambo's, to make a statement that we didn't appreciate Sambo's. And 99% of it was us, and we all ordered, we all ate, and we all got up and left.
Were there any repercussions from that?
What are they going to do? They didn't do anything to us. And nobody's going to tell on anybody, so we were good.
How would you say your, you mentioned that you knew you wanted to go to graduate school. Mm-hmm. How was your graduate school hunt?
A graduate school at the University of Chicago, as you know, back then, every department, the first thing they told us the first day of campus was every department in the school ranked between 1 and 5 in the country and 1 and 10 in the world, that you were the elite of the elite. Ball State, when we were here, they didn't have a lot of PhDs. They had people working on their PhDs or master's level people, things like that. At the University of Chicago, everybody had a PhD. At Ball State, if somebody had a PhD, you had to address them as doctor, so-and-so. At Ball State, at University of Chicago, since everybody had a PhD, you were Mary, John, Jane. Because the norm, again, the norm is PhD. The norm is that you're going to publish or perish. The norm is that you're going to bring research in. University of Chicago, their professors rode around campus in limos. And I thought, you mean you could ride in a limo and it's not a funeral? Man, this is great. So, totally different experience. I mean, they would fly people in to teach one class and then fly them back out.
So would you say that was kind of a culture shock for you? It
was more than a culture shock because the reading was more intense, the writing was more intense, everything was more intense. But it was all good because at the end of the day, when you have a master's from the University of Chicago, you're okay. Even now, when people ask you, oh, in grad school, you went to New York? I sure did. And you get...
How did your family feel about you attending graduate school?
I was the first one to get a master's, which is interesting because now I have 33 nieces and nephews, and all of them that are above 25, with the exception of one, has a master's degree. So I set the bar for the norm. So that's cool.
Were you ever concerned about leaving Indiana or being so far away from home?
Oh, no. If I had to do it over again, I told a friend I probably would have joined the Foreign Service because they get to travel and they live quite well on the government's money. But when I left University of Chicago, the one thing that they teach you that I'll always be, it was zero-based economics. And having owned my business for more than 20 years, that we have survived 2 recessions. and we're still in business. Education teaches you how to think. It's a process. And I had a job in between my first and second year of grad school. It was Dr. Norman Figerio who made statistics come alive, because up until then it was just a math. Then when he made it applied, then I was able to get all sorts of jobs, because here you are, an African-American female, and you can do statistics. I mean, I had all sorts of little consulting jobs, and when I learned that, someone, Dr. Finney said, well, how much are you going to charge? I said, oh, I charge maybe back then about $50 an hour. Okay. I thought, he's going to pay me $50 an hour to do this? It's going to take me 15 minutes? This is great.
Did you feel that Ball State prepared you for the University of Chicago?
I think it's not just Ball State. I think it's a combination of parents' discipline, self-discipline, and that you can't go outside and play until you've done your homework. You can't do this until your chores are done. And more or less self-discipline. Structure is good for children, and discipline, and you have to have the boundaries. Did Ball State prepare me? I'm not going to say that I'm not going to say that they were a hindrance. But it'd be interesting to ask Ball State alumni, how many of their students go to Ivy League schools or top schools, leave here and go there for graduate schools? I'd be interested in seeing that.
So do you feel like you're probably unique in the fact that you left Ball State for a elite graduate school?
I know I am. No, probably do it. Even when I meet people, non-African Americans, where'd you go to grad school? They normally they're local. They'll stay around Indiana, you're going to Purdue, and there's nothing wrong with those schools. But getting out of your environment is always healthy.
You said you worked in between your first and second master years?
Mm-hmm.
What was that job like?
It was Argonne National Lab. That's where Enrico Fermi founded his the bomb, and I was a research associate there, and it was owned by the University of Chicago.
How would you say the ratio was between African Americans and whites at the University of Chicago?
Oh, we were definitely minority. We were in the minority.
Did that lead to professors treating you any differently?
They treated everyone like crap. They didn't care. I mean, unless your father or mother were a great donor, you were just crap. And it was okay because you were all in the study groups together trying to get that piece of paper.
Was there any self-segregation there, or was?
Of course,
Mm-hmm.
of course, of course. And getting back to segregation, when the Justice Department back in 74, 75 told University of Chicago Law School that they had to comply with the desegregation and affirmative action, they said, no, we're not. They paid the fine rather than to change their policies. And then the president of University of Chicago went on to be the Attorney General under Ford's administration, which gave them even more power to say, I'm not doing what you want me to do as far as affirmative action is concerned.
What kind of segregation was there?
Well, again, I've seen this in young children, and it goes back to your earlier question about when did I realize I was different than the Eurocentric. People who want to be around each other, Asians are going to hang around Asians. Mexicans are going to hang around Mexicans. Blacks are going to hang around blacks. If nothing else, just to say, you're okay. You're okay. It's like a self-support group.
So was that the kind of segregation you experienced it?
Yeah, that was more or less, we were self-segregated. Like I said, as far as the institutional segregation, that was there because my first quarter at University of Chicago, I got all A's. I was so proud of myself. I got all A's, and I became their little poster child. And they allowed me to sit on the admissions committee. And as far as historically black colleges and universities, if you went to Howard, if you went to Fisk, if you went to Morehouse, the known African-American schools, they accepted your grade point average. If you went to Livingston, or if you went to Bishop, or if you went to South Carolina State A&T, they took your 4.0 and divided it by 2/3. So that's institutional racism.
Mm-hmm. So would you say your grades were or weren't affected by...
Pardon me?
Were your grades at the University of Chicago affected by their segregation policy?
No, I came from Ball State, so they didn't know if I was white or black, because from the application, I'd put other. So they didn't know where I was. And since my parents lived in Butler, Tarkington, they couldn't tell.
So would you say you put other for that reason?
Mm-hmm.
How did that affect you at the time, feeling like you needed to maybe cover your ethnicity a little bit?
Because of the quota system.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Most schools back then had a quota system, and that's what the Justice Department had told University of Chicago, that they hadn't met their quota as far as minorities. And that's what the school told them, we'll pay the fine. We're not going to meet it. And that wasn't unique to University of Chicago. That's most schools. Even Butler University, which is a private school, they've always had African Americans. Sigma Gamma Rho sorority was founded there in 1922, but they had a quota. My uncle tells a story when he got out of World War II, he wanted to go to Butler University because it was close to this house. And the dean, the person in admission said, we have enough of your kind. And he said, okay, because he knew exactly what she was telling him. We have enough colors here, so he ended up going somewhere else.
Would you say that that still happens today?
Of course. The Bakke decision, people will never realize, or maybe they will realize, how the Bakke decision affected admissions. And it's only going to get worse.
So do you think that African Americans would be in a better position without the quotas, or do you think it's just that people feel like they don't need to go above the quotas?
Racism hasn't changed in this country, only the laws have, and now they're attacking the laws. So we'll be worse off. I never in this day and age thought I would see the level of racism that I'm seeing today as opposed to a child, and it's blatant.
To go back a little bit to your time at the University of Chicago, where did you live while you were studying there?
I lived in student housing, graduate student housing. University of Chicago has I don't know if you're familiar with Hyde Park. We call it Mother University. University of Chicago was smart enough that they own probably 75% of Hyde Park. And now what they did in 2000, which was smart on their part, they built 2 new hospitals. And in 2000, they said, in order for us to protect the hospitals we're going to build, we're going to reach even further. But what they did was they met with some developers. I was one of the developers, and said, if you guys start developing, we'll have a program, employer-assisted housing program, where our employees can either get a low interest rate or we'll give them a down payment. And now, some 15 years later or 14 years later, 30% of the people who worked at the University of Chicago live within a 15-minute walk of the university, which was smart on their part because they have protected and insulated their investment of those 2 new hospitals that opened up in the past 5 years.
So how did your living situation compare to Ball State?
Pardon me?
How did your living situation when you were getting your master's compare to that of when you were getting your bachelor's?
In graduate student housing, you don't have a dormitory mother. You don't have a Betty Ribo coming in your room looking at you to make sure you're sleeping okay. So we were fine.
So just more freedom?
Yeah, it was graduate student housing. You had married couples, you had singles. I mean, it was okay. It was out in the community. They do have dorms, but their graduate dorms are like the graduate housing or apartment buildings.
And what job did you decide to go into after you got your master's?
Excuse me. After I received my master's, about the first 4 or 5 years, maybe, I changed jobs every 30 minutes. if someone offered me, I think my first job was $13,500 back in 1976. Then I went to 15. Then I went to 24. Then I went to 35. And every time, you know, someone offered me something. I was in 1978 or 79. I was Health Planner of the Year for Central Indiana. So that I used that award to market myself. And I went to work for the feds. And that was a $10,000 bonus. Then I stayed there. I got riffed because Reagan was in our office. Went to Department of Defense, won an award there. Excuse me, the Department of Defense was put into their management training program. It was a 3-star general out of Wright Pat, who said if I stick with him, I would be the highest ranking African American in the Pentagon. I told him he could give me Caspar Weinberger's job. I didn't really want to stay at the Department of Defense. Caspar Weinberger was the Secretary of Defense. And so I left there, and that's how I got into community development, which appeared to be a good niche for me.
So I know you mentioned a few of them, and I see here that you have received a lot of awards for your work. Which one would you say is the most rewarding for you?
In 2002, I was Female Developer of the Year for building houses. That the award was given because I was a developer with a vision. We were the first ones to do condo conversions north of 47th Street in Chicago. It was redlining, and one of the alumni here was instrumental in helping me get it on television because he was leaving the Chicago market, and he said, I don't care, man, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. So he did a story on redlining, and that helped get us past that barrier of people not giving mortgages. So the condos went from being $55,000 to $95,000. When someone has a camera saying, why won't you give this person a loan? They were like, and they changed. The other awards that I received was from Tesla School for Pregnant Girls, Community Rep Award. It was a school for pregnant girls, and I sat on their board. And the youngest pregnant child was like 11, and the oldest one was obviously high school age. But again, you can't be what you haven't seen. So I developed a program called Women with a Mission, Equal Power. So I brought in all the leading African American women throughout the city, and they would come speak to them. And that was the third Thursday of every month from 1 to 3. And they got to see all the local politicians. And what was really funny, excuse me, we had the television personalities on. And this one girl got up and said, hello, and da-da-da-da-da. And she sounded just like Evelyn Holmes, which was a primetime anchor. And Evelyn looked at her and said, you're trying to take my job. She said, in 10 more years, I'll have your job. But out of that, excuse me, the young lady who owned the Chicago Defender, she inherited, asked them, did they have a school newspaper? And he said, no. She said, well, who likes to write? Nobody wants to write. And she said, okay, maybe 1 or 2 kids raised their hand. She said, every Friday, I'll let you have a column, called Tesla Talks. Well, after about a month, from 2 people not wanting to, only wanting to write, half the school wanted to write articles. So I thought that was real cool, that she even went in and started teaching journalism to them, and she did it free on her own time. That award means more to me than anyone, to see people who didn't have any hope, they didn't have any identity, because they had a parent-teachers conference one time, and the board members had to come, and I said, okay, I'll cruise through and keep on going. Well, this lady, she saw me drive up. She said, that's a nice Jaguar, yeah. And we went upstairs. She kept coming to talk to me. She was a great-grandmother at 45. Not a grandmother, a great-grandmother. Every 15 years, someone had a child in her family. And that's how I created the program, Women with a Mission Equals Power. I said, this has to change. This is crazy. And then when I left, she said, can you give me a ride in your Jag? I thought, I am not going where you going. I said, where are you going? And she said somewhere. So I just took her to wherever she was going and kept going. But it really bothered me that these kids don't have any hope. You're just a child, raising a child, and she's going to party. And she's a great grandmother at 45. So the Tesla Community Service Award means more than me. Anyway, that you could see the change in children. And I saw one young lady at Walgreens, and she stopped me and said, "You go to Tesla?" I said, "No, I don't go to Tesla." She said, "No, but you're the lady who brings that program every month." And she told me about every speaker for that whole school year. I said, "They're getting it. They're getting it." So that was good.
We are about rounding up our time here, so I just have one more specific question for you. You mentioned that when you came to Ball State, you kind of had a goal of combining these two majors to go back and change your community. Do you believe that through these rewards and these programs you've made that you've had the opportunity to go back and change your community the way you wanted to?
The way I wanted to? No, I've changed several communities in Chicago. If you go, I can drive you around and you can see where we did housing. And what I'm doing right now, I joined the PTA of the elementary school that I went to, School 43. It's received Fs every year on the I-STEP. That has to change. And I joined the Butler Targeted Neighborhood Association since I've been back. I've only been back here in Indiana 2 years, 2.5 years. Most of my adult life was spent in Chicago. I've seen people, yes, I've done some changes, political campaigns, seen people who start out earnest and honest get elected and bring about change until they get corrupted. So, I mean, I sold Jesse Jackson Jr. his house. He started out so honest. I couldn't believe it when he got convicted. I mean, I felt like my nephew had been convicted. I said, he was so honest and earnest, he and his wife. Is there never enough change? No. But as long as I'm alive, I'm going to be trying to push the envelope of these children should have a childhood and a life like I have. So thank you for this opportunity, and I hope that this has helped. And I'm just excited that they even have a course like this now, because let me say this one thing. When I was at Ball State, Black history was taught by a white man. That's how bad it was. Okay.
Is there anything else about your life, time at Ball State, time after Ball State, you'd like to tell us?
No, I'm good. I'm not going to bore you with all my awards, but we're fine. Is there another question there?
Well, on behalf of the Ball State African American Alumni Project, I'd like to thank you for coming to participate in our interview and telling us your story.
Well, thank you for having us, and I would be interested to see how this plays out. Thank you.